the victims of the Auckland shooting were announced over the weekend. Boy, I got that one wrong. I thought they'd be migrants to this country. Well, they were, but they were both Pacific Island migrants who came to this country, who lived a good life, who were raising money for their families, who were going to work every day, and who were obviously had their lives cut short. So both Pacific Island gentlemen that were killed, both of whom were known to the shooter. We're talking about the Auckland CBD shooting, 1 Queen Street, from last week. And you see again, when we woke up to that, or when we woke up to that particular event happening, we just went, it was just a little like, am I living in New Zealand? And this is on the wake, this is not last Friday, the Friday before. And we all thought, this is just Thursday, wasn't it? This is bizarre. It was Thursday. And now, I wake up to, again, something that seems equally bizarre this morning, as we all do. It seems that we are living in bizarro times. And ironically, I think we always thought this sort of stuff happens overseas. This is something that happens in Spain. And you read about it as sort of an oddity. Or this, if there's a mass shooting, for example, it happens in the United States of America, where somebody's gone mad at a work site, which seems to be the sort of standard applicable revenge motive over there. Or if, 3 kiddies end up dead somewhere, you go, oh, that happens in sort of Russia or South Africa. But all these things happening to New Zealand at the same time, it's been very difficult. It's been, I won't say it hasn't been traumatic for us, because that's a much overused word, but these are difficult times. Things that are happening seem not to be the New Zealand that we know. And obviously last week and over the weekend again, expat New Zealanders, Paul Henry was one of them, Mark Ellis another, saying, they don't remember that. They look at New Zealand now and that's not the New Zealand that they feel A, proud of, or B, that they feel was the good old New Zealand. And I think I know what they mean by the good old New Zealand. They meant the good old New Zealand of, probably the good old New Zealand of which Ingrid and I grew up. And that was that everybody was roughly equal to each other. Everybody had a job. Even though the doctor might be living in a hill somewhere, they only earned 2 or 3 times, probably 3 times what the average worker earned on the flat. And we were all not only much more homogenous, but we all earned roughly the same amount of money. We had the same access to everything. There were universal benefits. We didn't think that the public health system wouldn't be there for us. For some strange reason, we all had some sort of confidence that education, we'd get all the education we needed. A simpler, cleaner time. But these are not simpler, cleaner times. These are difficult times. These are times that trying and test us. And I guess if you're in a position of responsibility, political or otherwise, they're even more trying and testing. Joining us to talk about that, and thank you very much for doing so. Good morning, good afternoon to you. It's Labour MP from Taieri, Ingrid Leary. How are you, Ingrid?
Hello, Michael.
These are trying times, aren't they?
Yeah, I was reflecting on what you were saying about the so-called good old days, because I think at one level they felt like the good old days, and certainly it felt more homogeneous, as you say, and a bit more egalitarian. But there were pockets in our community that were much more marginalised. And I think if we look at some of the hidden issues, we know, for example, domestic violence has been, deeply ingrained in our society for a long time. Now that we see incidents of it, there's more reporting. So not everything is always as it seems. Sometimes it's the real stories are also coming out now that perhaps were hidden away back in those so-called good old days. But definitely trying times with what's going on in the world.
Well, moving very quickly to the latest trying times, your reaction to the Kiri Allan affair?
Look, I'm still processing it. I'm not sure I can add more than what has been said in the media. Like everyone else, I woke up to the news. I've heard what the Prime Minister said today, and the fact that Cabinet is meeting and there will be a reallocation of duties and there'll be no new MPs going into Cabinet and so on. We're all processing it, and I don't have any other information apart from what we all are privy to at the moment.
You must be shocked, though, surely. I mean, I woke up this morning and went, you're joking. Am I living in New Zealand? did this just happen?
I think, as you're well aware, Michael, in politics, you never know what you're going to wake up to. Today was certainly one of those days, and as I say, we're still processing it.
What are your perceptions of Kiri Allan? I mean, you've worked with her over the last, ever since you've been in Parliament, probably presumably before that. How does she strike you as a person?
Look, Kiri's an incredibly talented minister, as the Prime Minister has said, and she's got a larger-than-life personality. She's lots of fun to work with. She's incredibly hardworking. And one of the things I really appreciate about her is that, probably a little bit like me, she's pretty direct and honest. You know where you stand. She's an honest person, and I've always appreciated that in working with her.
Does she ever strike you as the kind of person who would have mental health issues?
Look, Kiri has spoken recently about her mental health issues, and I applaud her for doing that.
Yeah, so do I, in one sense. But in another sense, in essence, she's lost her job. The suggestion from the Prime Minister is because of them and because of her actions associated with them. She had a week off on mental health issues and then came back. Then she had 2 weeks off and then came back. And now, well, I don't know, she'll be coming back again. If you've got mental health issues, they don't just clear up after a week or 2 weeks, do they?
I'm not going to comment on somebody else's mental health. Kiri's said everything there is to say as the Prime Minister. You know, I can't comment. I have no more or less information than anybody else, but I do applaud her for, again, her honesty in the journey that she's been on, certainly over the last few weeks.
You've lost Stuart Nash as the MP for Napier, and now Kiri is reconsidering her future as the MP for Taieri or that area. Are there going to be provisions in place to help all those people in those areas affected by Cyclone Gabrielle, do you think, Ingrid?
Look, there's already a lot of support. As we've seen, people have moved into the spaces. And I have to say that my colleague Anna Lork, who is the most ardent supporter you'll ever meet of Doogie, has done an incredible job, not only on the ground with the people of that area, but she is such a strong advocate for tuki within our caucus. I think people can be very sure they've got good representation.
It looks a bit unhealthy, unstable. Do you accept that if this was happening to the National Party, you'd be all over this like a rash, losing so many ministers at the start of the year? Do you accept that there might be a perception of instability at the moment?
I think political parties will always use whatever they can to their advantage. That's the nature of the game, as you know. I'm not going to comment on what other people's perceptions may be. I have absolute faith in Chris Hipkins as our Prime Minister. We're a very strong caucus. We're a very strong team, and we're very united behind him. I can only speak to the perceptions I have and within my team. What other people's perceptions are up to them.
But why would you? I see. One of the things that slightly surprises me is if she's gone, I would reallocate those portfolios. I might bring somebody in. I think you've got 5 or 6 ministers outside cabinet. Your minister's got a big workloads already. Regional government, we know how big that is as a portfolio. Justice, gosh, we know how big that is as well. Do you think you've got the strength or the slack in cabinet to be able to pick up those portfolios within the current cabinet and not bring somebody else in?
Look, those are decisions for the Prime Minister. He will make his commentary on what's being decided on the reallocation after Cabinet. We've got to remember that the Parliament is rising in a matter of weeks, and there will be a lot of campaigning going on after that. Of course, there will be business as usual for the various ministries, but there's also a lot of experience within the current Cabinet. I can understand the decision that he made this morning. It didn't surprise me at all to say when he said that he wouldn't be bringing out anyone else in. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's really for the Prime Minister to comment further once he has his Cabinet press conference. Oh,
well, he'll be doing that, this afternoon. Now, he's held a press conference this morning already. You've probably caught up with that as well. Listen, I know you can't have found it very comfortable yourself going through that mongrel mob thingy. how was that? I mean, we're talking about pressure on politicians. When the media were after you in a big way then, Ingrid, and suggested that you had acted in an inappropriate way, and they were suggesting that, how do you cope with that from a personal point of view?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was spending that week with a very sick family member, and so there was some perspective there in terms of needing to spend time with my family member. It was unfortunate, I think, the way it was portrayed, because I was invited to the meeting by an upstanding member of the community. I was genuinely under the impression it was an enrolment meeting. When I stood in the doorway and realised it wasn't the meeting I thought it was, I explained that and left, and the media chose to report it in the way they did. I think it did take a while for somebody to check on the fact that 2 Electoral Commission people were actually at the meeting, so I wasn't going to do the media's job for them. I was quite focused on the very short few days that I had with a member of my family. So it was an unfortunate distraction, and the facts are the facts, and if the media portray it that way, I guess that's the nature of what happens in politics, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I think the whole story broke because Harry Tam put something on social media or Twitter, which is, oh God, the worst thing ever, but there you go. But Harry Tam, the mongrel mob leader, or apparatchik, put something on the media, and that's how the story broke. Nevertheless, now you know what it's like being at the other end of that sort of media inquiry, the suggestion that you've done something wrong, all that sort of stuff. I guess what I was really interested in is, and here you were undergoing obviously a family issue at the same time. Did you think that the media treated you fairly or not during that time?
I think that it was a new experience for me to be under that sort of pressure. And I also have reflected as a former journalist about whether media has changed over time. And I do think there is more gotcha journalism than there used to be. I was discussing this on a radio interview last night with one of the ethnic media around the change in the Fourth Estate and how the framing of the narrative seems to come from journalists themselves in a much more assertive way. And so, people will take commentary to fit their frame, and the only antidote to that, if you like, is to have many, many pieces in a media space that people can then have a 360 degree and make up their own minds. It's the only way I can see that will ensure that people can wade through all the information out there and all the commentary and come to their own conclusions.
Well, I've been arguing pretty much that for the last 25 years, that journalists have stopped being journalists. They now shape the news to fit their particular perception or view of the world, and then tend to become opinion makers rather than journalists reporting the facts. So
yeah, when I taught journalism at the University of the South Pacific, I used to say that because I was brought up in the Jeff Black AUT days when we were taught you needed to be objective. I always had an issue with that because I don't think there's any such thing as objectivity. Now I do agree. I think that there is a much tighter framing. The sound bites are shorter. Journalists are under much more pressure. And what we are getting is a very particular perspective from a particular mainstream, and I would say quite middle class and quite privileged view of the world. And that's why I think the only way to make it more robust and more democratic is to get more voices, more perspectives and more opinions. And ideally it would be great if people had a bit more time and there were longer pieces so that we could have a more informed debate. But it's complicated because, sound bites these days are 10 seconds, 15 seconds at the most. There's not a lot of room for context. So it's quite fraught.
Well, the really interesting thing is your perspective. I'm reading from you that you think that the mainstream media are being unfair at the moment. Their perspective is not accurate nor real in terms of reporting what's carrying on. Have I got that right? Am I reading you right?
I think that it's fair to say that some mainstream media, so, I don't want to sweep a very broad brush over everybody. Some people are doing an excellent job, but I think you're right around the commentary element, that there is much more commentary and people being editorial and having a a license to be editorial. So when they're reporting, particularly on political stories, there is a license and an expectation from their outlets that they will have commentary. Now, sometimes that commentary is well informed and is quite fair and balanced. Other times it feels very unfair and unbalanced, and that goes both, towards the left and towards the right. I'm not pointing at any particular media, but the main thing I think is that people are aware of those biases and that there's transparency. I don't think we can stop it, but I do think people need to declare their bias, and then the audience can take that into account when they're making their own judgments about what they are reading and listening to.
Well, except, they're not going to announce their bias, are they? If I'm watching Television One News and they've decided that a particular spin, or Jessica Mutch, for example, the political editor, says that I think this is what's happening, and then she's not going to say, oh, by the way, I lean slightly left or I lean slightly right, is she? She's just going to say, this is what's happening.
That's correct, but then you've also got the equaliser, if you like, of social media, where some of the opinions about the bias of journalists will come out. Again, that's not necessarily a balanced view of the world because of the way the algorithms work, but at least there are more voices in the space. I just wish pieces were longer, that sound bites were longer, and that there was a bit more critical analysis of stuff rather than these very quick, and we call it in the game, as I'm sure you're aware, gotcha journalism. And sometimes, because there's so much focus on the gotcha, there isn't enough focus on policy and some of the really vexing questions that need to be resolved.
Oh, don't start me on journalists. For 30 years, I've opined that this is a profession that's sabotaged its integrity on a daily basis. So you and I might agree there. But I'm also interested, though, I'm interested in what the truth is. So there does tend to be a tendency, both by the media and by politicians, to make sure that a particular talking points, a particular narrative, a denial that there's a problem, are part of that narrative, if you like. Is it any wonder then that perhaps the New Zealand public's lost confidence in both the political process but also in the mainstream media as well?
Well, to your last point, that's an assertion from you. I don't believe the New Zealand public has. We have got very high engagement rates in voting, which is one.
But what about trust? Yeah, but what about trust?
Yeah. I think there is some loss of trust in some parts of society. There's increased trust in others, particularly amongst some of the more marginalised groups who perhaps feel that they are getting more representation now. So again, that's quite a sweeping statement. But if I take your earlier point, even the placement of where a fact is put in a story or a quotation, whether it's put high up in the story, 2 or 3 paragraphs down, makes quite a difference, as you've said. So, for example, there are a few stories published around the incident that I was involved in, where the fact that the Electoral Commission were actually in attendance at the meeting was buried quite far down the story. It's an example of the subtle bias that, influences people's perceptions.
My perception, now, you might and I might disagree on this one, but that's all right. We're allowed to. We're adults. My perception of the media, though, is that they lean left in this country because those are the sort of people who go to university, they go to journalism school, they are of a certain political view. Is your perception of the mainstream media not that?
No, it's not. I think there's a range of biases across our media, and it depends what media you consume. So the best thing you can do is try and consume as much as possible across the spectrum. I
agree with you on that, yeah.
There's some outlets I choose not to listen to because I think their bias is incredibly right-wing. And
would that be News Talk ZB?
I'm not going to name them, but I think that to keep sane and healthy in this job, and particularly to keep optimistic, which is really important, you've got to have some boundaries about what you'll consume. And it is a difficult time for people. There's cost of living pressures. There's the floods, the weather events, there's climate change, there's mental health. There's a lot going on for people, and so it's really important to maintain optimism and to be able to have a clear head. And I don't think it's helpful to sort of sit and listen to bias that is only one way. I try to get a range of perspectives so I can, chew it all over as I'm driving around my rather large electorate.
Yeah, it's massive. Listen, I applaud you on that, because I think getting a range of media, is both national and international, is critical if you're going to get a proper view of the world. Having said that, can I just say, despite everything that's happening you've just mentioned, and I don't think I've ever seen a government quite under this pressure before, for a long time. I'm not suggesting it hasn't happened, but for a long time. You've got cost of living, you've got inflation, you've got some services, public services, that are not working very well at all, and some almost on the verge of collapse if you listen to people in those areas. You've got, as you know, ministers sort of going mad. Yet you're still in this election. Does that surprise you, Ingrid, that, it's not over yet, and that if you listen to the pollsters, it's only 1 or 2 points and it could go either way?
Not at all. As you know, the only poll that matters is the poll on October the 14th. Having said that, we've just been talking about media bias and about the framing of reality. The fact that the polls are giving a different indication, which is that things may be pressured, there may be cost of living and other things to deal with, but there is also a sense of optimism, and the fact that we're coming out of the other end. We've got inflation due to come back to the 2 to 3% mark by the end of next year, and so on. Those conversations are clearly happening at the community level. They may not be being reflected in the media, but they're clearly happening. Otherwise, the polls wouldn't be as they are. And when I go around my electorate and speak to people, I think there's a sense that people have seen, despite the difficulties, stable, rational and compassionate leadership, and that's what they want to continue. I don't think there's an appetite for change. I think people are heaving a little bit of the beginning of a sigh of relief to say we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the last thing we want to do now is rock the boat by having a big change. Let's stay the course, let's let the reforms bed in, and let's get back to that manageable inflation rate so that the cost of living pressure will come down. And those are the conversations that I think are leading to those results where it's hard work for us, but I think we'll get over the line because I think people want that stability.
Fair enough. I understand that you would think that. I would think that too if I was any government MP of any flavour on the other side of that particular issue. But I did note in the last poll, I think the TVNZ poll, the TVNZ variant poll, that 2 out of 3 New Zealanders think, 2 to 1 New Zealanders think we're going in the wrong direction compared to we're going in the right direction. What would you think would be the reason for that perception?
Oh, look, without looking at the data, I don't know. But as I say, the important poll, the only important poll that matters is the election. No. And we've got work to do, and we're doing the work. We're getting out, we're having the conversations, and I think people are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. From your perspective,
as a constituency member of Parliament, a government, a government backbench MP, heading into what can only be described as a difficult election, what is the number one issue affecting people from your perspective of your constituents?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's fair to say that people are dealing with the cost of living and wanting to know that this is a temporary thing and that the inflation will come down and that things will go back to a bit more of a sense of normality. That seems to be it. I think people realise inflation is a global phenomenon. It's been difficult. There's mortgages to pay. We've seen, price increases in food, which is has been quite sticky. But I think there's a sense that as long as it's temporary, that's okay. We can get through it. We've just got to buckle down and get through it. And obviously we've had that targeted support. So the most important issue for people, I think, really is to know that we're coming to the end of that difficult period. Now, of course, I'm not a crystal ball gazer, so I don't know if there's going to be another weather event or natural disaster or anything else that could upset things further. But I think we have had just an unusually difficult time, and what people want to see is inflation come down and prices go back to what feels like a more normal, day-to-day scenario.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Ingrid. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to catching up with you next week.
You too.
Okay. That is Ingrid Leary, Labour MP for Taieri. I'm always amazed. People text me and say, why do you have this person on? I go, because we're the platform. We are the platform. I'd like to think that we can have as many different ranges of opinions as possible, and that the questions that you might need to be asked. But, that's what freedom of speech is about. It's not about denying people that you might disagree with both philosophically and politically from the option of expressing their views. Because, to be perfectly honest with you, we all get much more better and informed if we see the combat and exchange of ideas and thoughts. So there's the answer to that question.